Question I would like to pose: do you think we're in a data war?
Um, are we in a data war? I think war's emotive. I'm not sure we're in a data war. I think there's lots of conversations which we fall down. I think as a Western capitalist democracy, where if people aren't following the guidelines that we have, whatever those are, and which we abide our lives and values and lives by, people will say to you, "Oh, well, then they actually are against what we are doing." I'm not sure that's the case. I think for sure there is a front based on some ideology, both from particularly the Asia community and primarily, of course, China, and of course some of the less reputable countries and state operators like Russia, who are seeking to just cause havoc as best they can, where they have recognized that the value of data is much higher, and anything that is increasing in value will also have far much more focus. But I think anybody who doesn't think that the Western world is doing the same thing to them in their countries is naive. So I think that, yeah, is there a war going on? I think there's probably a battle, if I'm not going to extend it too much, but I don't think there's a war going on yet. And if there is a war going on, frankly, it's going to come down to a battle between, or a front off between the Chinese and the Americans, frankly, because that's where the big pools of activity, innovation, I think invention and application are coming either on the West Coast in particular of America and particularly in China.
Do you think that the people understand the value of data realistically from an individual point of view? Obviously, people sign away free Google, free Facebook. They're getting a great logistics service by Amazon, and that's fantastic. And it's all free. But do we really? I suppose, as a nation, do we really understand the value of our data as a massive consumer market?
Yeah. I think there's two sides to that again, and I'm sorry to split it up, but I think there's two sides to that. I think the value of our data, I think very few of us understand what that is, because the whole point of data is scale. Everything about data is about scale. So if you can create the kinds of environments, ecologies, and more importantly, populations, and they are billions of individuals who are able to provide the kind of audience or the kind of consumption patterns or the kind of consumption that you require in your services, then that's astonishing. Of course, the internet is the primary facilitator of that. But I think the bigger question for us in that data, are we aware of it, is the privacy aspect to it, which I'm sure is what you were kind of aiming at there. And that is, do we understand the implications to our own privacy and security as the nature of that data is either revealed or used or in some way monetized, not by us? And I think that's a really interesting question. I think existentially, we probably all feel a little uncomfortable about it sometimes. I think that's true. But frankly, depending on your age, you have little to almost no regard of or even value that you place to the kind of activities that you undertake as an individual and the value that may have to somebody else. You just don't, unless you are working, unless it's in your role as a job. Clearly, if you're working in local government or federal governments of some sort, or you're working in a highly sensitive, regulated environment, clearly you understand the value of that data. But the fact that you and I might walk down to Starbucks, get a coffee and come back doesn't feel that important to us, and certainly doesn't feel that valuable to us. But I guarantee you, to Starbucks, that's very important. To Google, it's very important. To Amazon, it's very important. And of course, to a myriad of other providers. And so the fact that we're prepared to be given an operating system on a mobile phone, for example, which allows us to do that in, for example, Android, feels that it's a little giveaway for what we get in return, which is some fantastic at point of use services. And I think that, I've used this story before, you may have heard it before, but I've used it before, and I said, I can remember the early days. I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet when I had a credit card, and I only had one credit card in those days, not for any reasons that aren't important. There was no security issue there or credit issue. But I can remember the first time I used that on the internet, and I probably was for a holiday, because that's what most people use it for in the first instance, booking a hotel or booking a flight or something like that. And I remember just before I put my 4-digit, my 3-digit security number at the back, the CVV number at the back, just before I did that, I thought, I paused, but I thought, listen, I'm covered. Insurance is there. I understand I've got all that in place. I feel comfortable doing that, and I hit it. that even though I acknowledge that there are issues around the security of even the access to finance, it doesn't feel like it's my finance, because when there is an issue, I can go to somebody who's taken responsibility of it, whether that's the bank or whether that's the credit card company, and go forward. And I think that's where we are with data and privacy. Now, I think that's changing a little bit at the moment. And I think two things have led to that. I think as individuals, we aren't changing, but I think regulatorily, and particularly on a state level, our governments are recognizing that in order to best protect and perhaps to use the data, why should they be allowing it to be moved out to Asia or to America for them to make money out of it, whoever they are? Whereas why can't we do it in the UK or in Germany or in Spain or in Italy or in Argentina or in India or wherever it might be? And I think that we're starting to see that. And what you're seeing in the last 12 months is two things have happened. The scale of these businesses and the sheer volume of cash that they're generating, which in turn creates its own issues, has meant that the governments around the world are starting to acknowledge not only that they have an impact on their day-to-day social lives, and in many cases in their political lives, and that's when you're going to get politicians' attention, threaten their jobs. And you saw that in many elections recently. You saw it here in the UK, you saw it in America, you've seen it in one or two other places around the world as being issues, let's leave it at that, in terms of where it's going. Then you start to get the attention of the governments who will legislate. And what you're starting to see now is a change of tone from the governments, who are seeking to work reasonably closely with these big providers, but also to control them in a way that meets the UK's values and goals, or the Germany's values and goals, which may not necessarily be the same as California's values and goals, even though we all speak the same language, or relatively all speak the same language. I mean metaphorically again, not literally German and English. And I think that all of those things are important, and you're seeing that the scale of impact that data is starting to have, both on the organization of our societies, the provision of our governments, and some of the regulatory environments that we're talking about, means that they're becoming much more acute in terms of their understanding of the impact and the value. So I think at a state level, our governments are becoming much more acute to it. Now, what they'll do is what they tried to do with Microsoft in the 1990s, and they'll basically keep fining these companies until they come into line, in line with their state. There's currently, I think, 4 investigations just about Apple going on in the EU, for example, right now. Just 4, just one company. And what they did with Microsoft in the 1990s was they just kept fining them. And eventually, no matter how big you are, everybody says, oh, a $5 billion fine is nothing for Google. Well, I'm sorry, that's not true. They've got shareholders who they answer to. They can't be paying $4 and $5 billion fines every 3 or 4 years. It's just not the way the world can work. So I think all of those things will start to see a more normalization of that relationship in whatever that data might look like going forward. And that's a very long answer to your original question.